Imagine living in a city with over 1 million people, yet not a single electric pump, modern water treatment plant, or underground pipe carrying clean drinking water into your home. It sounds impossible. But for thousands of years, some of history's greatest cities managed exactly that. And in many cases, their water systems were so effective that parts of them still function today. The real mystery isn't how ancient cities found water. It's how they kept millions alive without the technology we consider essential. Every successful ancient city began with one decision: where to build. You might assume kings chose locations because they were easy to defend or rich in farmland. Those factors certainly mattered. But before walls, temples, or markets could exist, there had to be a dependable source of fresh water. Without it, the city simply couldn't survive. That's why many of humanity's earliest urban centers appeared beside rivers, natural springs, lakes, or reliable groundwater. Mesopotamian cities grew between the Tigris and Euphrates. Ancient Egypt depended almost entirely on the Nile. Cities in the Indus Valley flourished where rivers provided both drinking water and irrigation. Water determined everything: population size, agriculture, trade, even political power. A city with a reliable water supply could support craftsmen, merchants, priests, soldiers, and rulers who didn't need to farm every day. That specialization allowed civilization itself to expand. But rivers created problems too. Floods contaminated drinking water. Dry seasons reduced supply. Growing populations demanded more than nearby streams could provide. Soon, simply living beside water wasn't enough. People had to learn how to move it. That challenge transformed engineering forever. Long before metal pipes became common, ancient builders discovered a surprisingly simple principle. Water wants to flow downhill. Everything else followed from that observation. Rather than forcing water with pumps, engineers designed systems that relied almost entirely on gravity. A spring, located even slightly higher than a city, could provide a continuous flow if the route was carefully planned. The trick wasn't making water move, it was preventing it from moving too fast. A steep slope could erode channels or damage structures. A route that was too flat allowed water to stagnate. Ancient surveyors solved this with astonishing precision, measuring gradual changes in elevation across long distances using basic tools, remarkable patience, and generations of accumulated experience. The Romans became famous for perfecting this approach through aqueducts, but they were far from the first. Earlier civilizations in Persia, Greece, and elsewhere had already developed sophisticated methods for transporting water across difficult landscapes. Gravity never became tired. It never demanded fuel. It worked every hour of every day. That made it one of history's greatest engineering partners. Once water reached the city, however, a new question emerged. How do you distribute enough clean water to thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people without wasting it? The answer required innovations that many modern people would never expect from the ancient world. One of the greatest engineering breakthroughs in history wasn't an invention you could easily see. It was the aqueduct. When most people hear that word, they picture towering stone arches stretching across valleys. Those impressive bridges certainly existed, but they made up only a small portion of the entire system. Most aqueducts actually ran underground, protected from sunlight, weather, evaporation, and contamination. The famous arches appeared only when engineers had no other choice. If a valley interrupted the route, they built elegant stone structures to maintain the precise gradient the water required. In many places, the drop was only a few centimeters over hundreds of meters. A mistake that seemed tiny could stop the entire flow. Roman engineers surveyed these routes with extraordinary care. Some aqueducts stretched for more than 50 miles before reaching a city, carrying spring water almost entirely by gravity. They crossed hills, tunneled through rock, and occasionally passed over bridges that still stand nearly 2,000 years later. But Rome wasn't alone. The Greeks built impressive water channels centuries earlier, while Persian engineers created underground tunnel systems known today as Aqueducts. These gently sloping tunnels tapped groundwater in the foothills and carried cool, clean water across deserts without exposing it to the hot sun. It was a brilliant solution. By keeping the water underground, evaporation remained remarkably low, making settlements possible in landscapes that appeared almost uninhabitable. Different civilizations, different techniques, the same goal: deliver clean water where nature never intended it to go. Bringing water into a city solved only half the problem. The real challenge was keeping it clean. Ancient people didn't understand bacteria, viruses, or microscopic parasites. Yet many societies recognized through experience that some water sources were safer than others. Flowing spring water usually tasted fresher than stagnant ponds. Clear water from protected sources often caused fewer illnesses than water collected downstream from crowded settlements. Observation became their science. Roman aqueducts commonly collected water from distant mountain springs rather than polluted sections of nearby rivers. Many systems included settling tanks where heavier sand and sediment could sink before the water continued toward the city. While these tanks did not sterilize the water, they noticeably improved its clarity. Elsewhere, households stored water in ceramic jars that naturally cooled the contents through evaporation. Covered containers helped reduce contamination from dust, insects, and animals. Some civilizations also filtered water through layers of cloth or porous materials before drinking it. These methods could remove larger particles, even though people had no knowledge of microbes. Experience taught valuable lessons. If a spring consistently produced healthier communities, people protected it. If one source repeatedly made people sick, they searched for another. Trial and error shaped public health long before anyone could explain why certain practices worked. The science came much later. The wisdom arrived first. And as cities continued growing, keeping water clean became inseparable from another challenge that was even less pleasant: getting rid of wastewater before it returned to the drinking supply. Here's where ancient cities became far more advanced than most people realize. Supplying clean water meant very little if dirty water had nowhere to go. A city that ignored waste eventually poisoned its own water supply. Some civilizations learned that lesson the hard way. Others solved it with engineering that still amazes archaeologists. The cities of the Indus Valley Civilization, including Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, possessed remarkably organized drainage systems more than 4,000 years ago. Many houses had bathing areas connected to covered brick drains running beneath the streets. Wastewater flowed away from homes instead of collecting in crowded neighborhoods. That level of planning was extraordinary. Entire streets were designed with drainage in mind. Inspection openings allowed certain sections to be cleaned. Brick channels followed carefully planned routes toward larger drains. While these systems did not function exactly like modern sewers, they demonstrate an impressive understanding that wastewater needed controlled removal. The Romans expanded this idea even further. Massive public drains such as the Cloaca Maxima helped carry stormwater and wastewater away from parts of the city. Originally built to drain marshland, the system gradually became one of the most famous engineering projects of the ancient world. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept cities functioning. Clean water and dirty water could never be allowed to mix for long. Ancient engineers may not have understood microorganisms, yet they understood something equally important. Filth belonged somewhere else. That practical insight protected countless lives. Of course, not every person enjoyed unlimited access to water. Ancient cities distributed it differently depending on wealth, location, and government policy. In Rome, public fountains became one of the most important parts of daily life. Aqueducts constantly supplied these fountains, allowing ordinary citizens to collect fresh water without owning private infrastructure. Wealthier households sometimes received direct water connections, but these required permission and maintenance. For everyone else, fountains served as neighborhood lifelines. People gathered there every day. Children carried small containers. Workers filled larger jars before returning home. Conversations, trade, and local news often spread around these shared water sources. Water shaped community life as much as it sustained physical survival. Elsewhere, cities relied on wells dug into underground aquifers. Some wells reached astonishing depths, requiring skilled construction to prevent collapse. Others connected to underground galleries that naturally replenished groundwater over time. Rainwater harvesting also became surprisingly sophisticated. Homes in regions with seasonal rainfall often directed water from roofs into underground cisterns lined with waterproof plaster. During dry months, these carefully stored reserves became invaluable. Nothing went to waste. Every drop required planning. Every season demanded preparation. Modern people often expect water to appear instantly by turning a faucet. Ancient citizens expected something different. They expected effort. And that expectation inspired some of the most ingenious water management systems ever created. Systems that would continue serving entire civilizations for centuries. Not every ancient city was fortunate enough to sit beside a mighty river or a dependable spring. Some survived in places where rain fell only a few weeks each year. At first glance, that seems impossible. Yet desert civilizations developed water systems so effective that many remained in use for centuries. Across Persia, engineers expanded vast networks of qanats that stretched for miles beneath the ground. Workers dug a gently sloping tunnel from an underground aquifer toward towns and farms. Along the route, they excavated dozens of vertical shafts. These openings allowed fresh air inside, provided access for maintenance, and helped remove rock and soil during construction. The work was incredibly dangerous. A single mistake could collapse part of the tunnel. Yet thousands of these underground channels were completed, bringing cool groundwater to communities that otherwise could never have supported large populations. Farther west, the Nabateans transformed one of the driest landscapes on Earth into a thriving trade kingdom centered on Petra. They carved channels into rock, built dams to slow flash floods, and stored precious rainwater inside enormous cisterns hidden throughout the city. They treated every storm as an opportunity. A brief desert rainfall could supply water long after the clouds disappeared. Nature offered only small chances. Ancient engineers learned not to waste them. Water systems also demanded constant maintenance. Building them was only the beginning. An aqueduct clogged with mineral deposits gradually slowed. A blocked drain flooded streets. A neglected cistern filled with mud instead of clean water. Without regular repairs, even the greatest engineering achievement could fail within years. The Romans understood this well. Historical records describe officials responsible for inspecting aqueducts, organizing repairs, preventing illegal water theft, and ensuring channels remained unobstructed. Mineral deposits known today as limescale slowly accumulated inside stone conduits, reducing water flow unless workers periodically removed them. Maintenance crews rarely became famous, but cities depended on them. The same was true elsewhere. Canal tunnels required frequent cleaning after floods or cave-ins. Wells had to be reinforced when their walls weakened. Reservoirs needed sediment removed before storage capacity disappeared. Most of this work happened out of sight. People noticed only when something stopped working. In many ways, ancient water systems resembled modern infrastructure. You rarely think about them until they fail. That quiet reliability was no accident. It resulted from thousands of hours of labor performed by skilled workers whose names history almost never recorded. Their greatest success was becoming invisible. Because when clean water arrived every day, nobody stopped to admire the engineering behind it. They simply filled their jars and continued with life. And perhaps the most surprising part of all is that some of those ancient systems are still delivering water even today. The most astonishing proof of ancient engineering isn't found in history books. It's found in systems that never completely stopped working. Across parts of the Middle East, thousands of ancient qanats continued supplying water for centuries, and some remain in use today after careful maintenance. Their underground design protected water from intense heat while minimizing evaporation, making them remarkably efficient in dry climates. Several Roman aqueducts also survived long after the empire itself declined. Some were repaired during the Middle Ages. Others influenced the routes of later water systems because the original engineers had already identified the most practical paths across difficult terrain. Their calculations were so accurate that later generations often chose not to replace them. They simply improved them. That's an extraordinary achievement. Imagine constructing something without electricity, computers, lasers, or heavy machinery, and having it remain useful for nearly 2,000 years. It reminds you that good engineering is measured not by complexity, but by durability. Ancient builders understood that better than many people realized. Perhaps the biggest surprise is that ancient cities rarely depended on just one source of water. Smart planners created backup systems. If a spring slowed during drought, wells could continue supplying groundwater. If seasonal rains arrived, cisterns captured every possible drop. If rivers flooded and turned muddy, stored reserves became even more valuable. Redundancy wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Some cities combined aqueducts, wells, reservoirs, fountains, rainwater collection, and underground storage into a single interconnected network. Each system compensated for the weaknesses of another. That flexibility allowed cities to endure changing seasons, population growth, and occasional natural disasters. It also reduced risk. Ancient engineers understood something that modern infrastructure experts still emphasize today. Never rely on a single point of failure. If one source disappears, another must be ready. The principle sounds surprisingly modern, yet people were applying it thousands of years ago using stone, clay, gravity, and careful observation alone. The more archaeologists uncover, the clearer the picture becomes. Ancient cities were not surviving despite primitive technology. They were succeeding because they mastered the technology available to them with extraordinary skill. And the final lesson may be the most impressive of all. It has less to do with engineering, and far more to do with the people who trusted these systems every single day. So how did ancient cities get clean water without pipes? The surprising answer is that many of them didn't need the kind of pipes we imagine today. Instead, they built entire systems around gravity, Geography, careful planning, and constant maintenance. Springs fed aqueducts. Underground tunnels carried groundwater across deserts. Wells reached hidden aquifers. Cisterns captured seasonal rain. Public fountains distributed fresh water throughout neighborhoods while drains carried wastewater away before it could become a larger problem. No single invention solved everything. It was the combination that mattered. Each civilization adapted its methods to its landscape. Mountain cities relied on high-elevation springs. River civilizations controlled flooding and storage. Desert kingdoms harvested every precious drop they could find. Different environments demanded different solutions, yet all shared one remarkable idea. Water was too valuable to waste. Every channel had a purpose. Every reservoir represented preparation. Every repaired tunnel protected the future. Ancient engineers were not simply moving water. They were designing stability. When people admire the ruins of Rome, Petra, Mohenjo-Daro, or ancient Persian settlements, they often focus on temples, monuments, or towering walls. Yet, none of those achievements would have mattered without something far less dramatic: clean water. A city cannot grow if its people are constantly searching for the next drink. Markets cannot thrive. Workshops cannot expand. Public life cannot flourish. Civilization itself depends on solving one simple problem every single day. How do you deliver safe water to thousands of people? Ancient societies answered that question with patience instead of machines, observation instead of electronics, and engineering that respected the natural movement of water rather than fighting against it. That is why so many of their systems lasted for centuries. They worked with nature, not against it. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson hidden beneath the stones of the ancient world. The most important technologies are not always the loudest or the most complicated. Sometimes they are the quiet systems operating beneath your feet, unnoticed until they stop. Long before modern plumbing transformed daily life, ancient engineers had already discovered a timeless truth. A civilization is only as strong as the water it can protect, move, and share. And thousands of years later, many cities around the world still rely on those very same principles, proving that some of humanity's oldest ideas were also among its greatest.